All right, good evening, everybody. I am your National Secretary, Natalie Mikkelson. We are here this evening to talk about officer transition. So joining me tonight, I'll introduce our panel and say a very late Happy Founders Day to them. We have Jonah Goodman, and then we have Jessica Iraqi. So if you just want to say hello and introduce yourselves.
Hi, Jonah Goodman, alumnus of Delta Alpha Chapter, currently in Capital Alumni Chapter, former national president.
Hi, I'm Jessica Iraqi, alum of the Epsilon New Chapter at Kennesaw State University. After I graduated, I was a chapter consultant for 2 years, and recently this past year transitioned into the Colony Development Coordinator, so I helped transition our new colonies into wonderful chapters. So.
That's wonderful. So thank you guys so much for taking time out of your evening to join us tonight and have this discussion. So we've got some questions for our panel that we'll discuss, and then you can also feel free to tweet us your questions. Just use hashtag PSP Roundtable, and we will try to get to as many as we can. So our first question that we have here is, why do you think that having an officer transition plan is important?
I think it's always a little nerve-wracking and challenging when you're taking on a new position. So having someone that can guide you through that process, who's been there, who knows the challenges, who knows some of the things that might work really well, that also always makes the transition a little bit easier. I always used to tell my chapters that I worked with, I love to see a chapter start running where the old officers left off, and so I think a really strong transition helps that happen.
Yep. Definitely. I'd also say you're going to be in transition programs one way or another for life, throughout careers, throughout many things. So getting into the habit of understanding the value of them now is really critical, really going to help you get a good step in the right direction, especially when we're looking at post-collegiate life in terms of where you're going to be.
And I think it's important, too, to know that even if you are no stranger to being an officer, the group of people that you have to work with might also change. So having a plan in place is really important on how to facilitate going on from year to year. So that's great. Some people want to know what resources maybe the national office has that are available to their chapter. This will probably be a good one for Jessica.
Yes, if I can tell you anything this whole time, I tell you that as soon as you're done watching this, you go to the Resource Center and check it out, because there are so many great resources on every topic. But for officer transition specifically, we actually have a guide that tells you step by step what to do throughout the process, all the way from electing new officers to getting them transitioned to the officer transition ceremony that we have. There's also an elections guide that details that process and how to do that really well. So those are really great resources to use that are always being updated to add new things that we're learning from our chapters and changes to policies.
Cool. I'd also say that you probably have a ton of resources on campus, and I know your consultants always going to be telling you look for them for resources for scholarship events and outreach, but think about all the programs on campus and staff that do have annual transitions similar to yourself, like a Res Life program that's constantly bringing in new people every year. Feel free to reach out to them and ask them to come talk about what does their transition program look like, and use those resources you have on campus in addition to the wonderful stuff in our online toolbox for you guys.
And you can find that, I believe the address is phisigmapi.org/resources, and all of the information that Jessica mentioned is available there. So that's awesome. Now, what do you guys think? How long should an officer transition program be?
So the guide that we have on the Resource Center that we just talked about, it recommends a 4-week program, starting with elections and kind of going through. I think that's, it's a month. It's a good amount of time, but every chapter is different. So I think as long as you have some kind of program in place, that's going to be the best, and whatever is going to work best for your members in your chapter. I think it's really important that you're able to enforce it and actually do it. So sitting down and talking with, okay, what does everybody have time for, is the best.
Now, what do you think, Jonah? We were talking about this earlier, just with both of us serving on council, and there's transition on that part of the team as well. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show that, whether you're a first-time officer on an e-board or at any other point in life, that you're constantly going to be going through transitional programs. And the stronger the transitional program that you either start and help others through, or that you yourself are going to go through, just the better the experience is going to be. You get past a learning curve a lot faster and can start implementing, progress, changes that you want to see just a lot faster. So it's valuable. It's something you're always going to see. See, on the council side, one of the things that we learned a bit, and I think might help take back to the chapter levels as you're thinking about this 4-week program, is also realize that while the transition program might be 4 weeks, it's kind of a year-round thing to be constantly thinking about. You're always documenting, what are these resources I need to hand off? That should be constantly going on, and it shouldn't be, oh, my transition program starts tomorrow, so let me remember all these things, like here's all the passwords, here's this and that. It's going to help you a lot if thinking about transition and thinking about training is a year-round thing, while the program and the handoff may be a 4-week, probably a spring time period. Just throughout the year, what documentation do you need to have? Probably really critical to talk amongst your team. With council, we would often talk about not just our own role, which we transition, but what do we as a team need to transition, so that if somebody was missing a piece of it, or larger pieces, there are bigger things that you collectively are doing that you will have to transition. It's not just a one-on-one role, but it's how does a bunch of new people come onto either a partially existing team, or how do a lot of new people transition and take over a whole new team that may not have done it. So think about it year-round, and document, and make sure that's online and shared with other people, so that somebody doesn't walk away with all that institutional knowledge.
I think that goes back to the first question that we had, is just having that plan in place. So knowing when your elections are going to be ahead of time, and planning that out so that you can have those joint meetings with the outgoing officers and the incoming officers. We at the council level, we kind of have that luxury because the Constitution says when elections are going to be. So we'll usually have candidates come in and actually sit in on council meetings so that they can see exactly what we're doing as well, just throughout the term, like Jonah was saying. So planning ahead, knowing when your elections are, is a great way to start.
I think to your point, Natalie, too, it's important to recognize that it's a process. There should be progression in the transition program, that every week you're getting more and more responsibility, with a goal that at the end of that program, the new officers are fully in their positions, and the old or outgoing officers can give feedback or are still there for questions. It doesn't just kind of end. And we also have a question from Twitter.
Yay.
Throwing that in, yeah. So Cassidy on Twitter asks, how would you suggest to make a transition smoother, and how do you foster the confidence in front of chapter? A good one.
Checking out the Twitter question.
Yeah, so I'll talk about confidence, and now I'll give you a chance to talk about like the smoothness of it, maybe. I've been through a few rounds of council transition. I served with a couple teams, and one of the things that it came back to a lot for us was just realizing that the chapter, or the grand chapter, they made a decision on what this new leadership team looked like, and whether or not that comprised of the candidate A or candidate B, to respect that decision, that they heard many sides of a case and they decided this is the best way to move forward, and they likely selected what to them is the best candidate. So I think really being respectful of that process and what they went through will help kind of ease that. I think I heard a little bit in Cassie's question about some transitions between teams when maybe it shifts a little bit in terms of priorities or focus a bit. So be respectful of the chapter that made these decisions, and understand that if you were maybe on the other side of it and didn't quite agree with it, the best way to implement those changes is to help this new team share the ideas, that maybe different ideas that you had that didn't quite make it into that transition program, with them, so that all ideas are heard going forward, and it's not it's somebody else, it's time for me to just walk away. They can figure out how to do it on their own. The best program is one that includes everybody and includes as many ideas as possible, so that there is a diversity of that kind of information, and it's not a hard transition from last year's team to this year's team, and there's no collaboration in there.
Mm-hmm. And just to speak to collaboration, when I was a collegiate member, I served as historian for my chapter. So back at Gamma Epsilon, historian had their own committee. So what I would do is, if somebody was interested in serving on the position, that I would instill that confidence in them by having them help me with whatever I needed to do if we were doing a history lesson at the meeting that week, or helping with, part of my job was to help with the scrapbook and things like that. So I took the confidence piece a little different than you did, Jonah, in that you are fostering that confidence for them to learn and be prepared to serve in that position in the future. So great. Sorry, I have two computer screens going here, so I'm trying to get our questions. So next question we have is, what do you think that first-time officers should know? What do you wish you knew, maybe?
Yeah, I held a couple positions in my undergraduate chapter, and even as a chapter consultant, I think I wish I would have asked more questions. I think sometimes we're a little shy to maybe ask, but as soon as you start thinking about running for a position, you start shadowing, you might have questions, and I would just start a list. Anything that you have questions about, not only about the position, but if it's an executive board position or an executive council, maybe about how that operates, when their meetings are, and how those are run. So I think really they should know anything that they want to know that's going to help them feel more confident in the position.
I think for me, and I don't know if you remember this far back, Jonah, but when I was thinking about running for council, I definitely reached out to you and a few other members of council, and I just said, please just give me the real deal and tell me everything tell me good, tell me what's difficult about it, so that I could be, as prepared as possible for possibly serving on that role. So I definitely love that, making sure you're asking lots of questions.
Yeah, and that I think that's right. Like, be honest when you're helping somebody out with that transition, or when you yourself are asking these questions. And to your point, you want to know the hard answers as well as the fun ones, right? How much time is this really going to take? How did you deal with this very difficult situation that I know will be part of my job requirements coming into it? And if you can be honest with yourself and whether you can do that up front and with the team you're coming into, it'll definitely help, rather than jumping into that learning curve partway through. I think I'd also add, for maybe somebody that's a first-time new officer transition, realize that everyone else that you're serving with or who has come before you at some point was in your shoes. People don't naturally have this amazing talent to just be a first-time officer and leader. It comes through trial and error, and realistically for all of us, it comes through failing and learning from failures, and that failure or not achieving something isn't a bad thing. Everyone has stumbles. Everyone doesn't quite get to everything they want to get to, and I'd say the biggest lesson is learn how to learn from those either mistakes or not what you would call complete successes. You can look at it very negatively, or you can look at it as a growth opportunity and say, I really was hoping to do this. What impeded my ability to get there? Was it timing? Do I need to next time, have a better project plan in place? Do I need, is it volunteers? Was it that I couldn't help my volunteers enough? And really just honestly assess that. And everyone has been there before, so reach out for help if you need it, and don't get frustrated. Just know it's something that comes with time and experience.
Absolutely. So just to give a quick plug for Leadership in Action, so there are several Leadership in Action modules that we have that are very helpful for first-time officers. There are tons up for first-time officers, for juggling multiple priorities, and for providing successful feedback. And if you're interested, you can request a module. You can just go on phisigmapi.org/LIA, Leadership in Action. And there's tons of great resources there for you. Let's see. I will take some time to encourage the audience to ask any questions if they want to. We did have an email question, though, to get to, so I'll get to that first. And the email question is, we have had problems with members checking out in their senior year. How do we make sure they stay present enough to ensure a proper transition?
Yeah, good question. I think we all know kind of, to Natalie's point before with council knowing when elections were going to happen, we all know when graduation's happening. You know at least a year in advance. So part of it is going to be that scheduling and knowing that's coming up. And you know, working with their schedule. So one of it's timeliness. The sooner you can transition, sooner you can help them focus on what's next for them, whether that's graduation, that might be interviews, that might be looking at grad school. They're going to have a lot on their mind, and as much as we all, and they including, want to be involved in this transition, there's probably some bigger decisions coming up for them. So giving them the time to prepare earlier on will definitely help them find time to engage.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I'm a really big supporter of reminding people of why you're doing what you're doing, and so I think bringing the why into the transition program, it's really about making sure that everything that we did well this semester as a chapter, as an e-board, that we do it better next semester, and so we have to transition that to that same point. We have to make sure that all the challenges that we hit, or every road bump that we came in front of, that we have to make sure that doesn't happen the semester before. And it's really about leaving their legacy. So we want to make sure that the legacy that they had as an officer and a legacy that the chapter has continues. And so when you kind of pull their heartstrings a little bit and remind them why the officer transition program is so important, I think they're going to be a little bit more engaged.
Yeah, and I love that point you made about leaving a legacy. I know part of my thoughts when I was having my own senior year moments was that I always wanted to make sure that I left the chapter in a better place than when I found it. So part of doing that is making sure that all the good work that we've done so far kind of keeps getting carried on. And even just having your successor know that that's important to them as well. Like, it's just as important for them to get to know the position and get to know what to do, so that you're leaving them in a good place. So I love that, leaving a legacy piece. All right. So we have another question that was emailed, and it says, it's from Hunter. I forget what chapter Hunter is from, but shout out. I know I met you at convention, I think. Would it be beneficial to elect officers earlier in the semester so that new officers have time to be trained by the end of the semester?
I think a giant yes to that question. There are some questions that you might not have until you actually start doing something. Maybe you're a secretary, and until you actually start to put together the minutes or send them out, you might think of questions that you didn't have before. So I think giving the new officers time to actually experience the position and come up with any challenges that they have, that's a really great time, while the previous officers are still there, still on campus, still able to get in touch with.
Yeah, definitely. I would add, you know, it's helpful too, knowing that, especially if you're on a academic year and you're transitioning right before a summer break for a lot of people, when there's going to be a big drop-off in terms of you've given all this information and then you leave for 2 or 3 months possibly, and you aren't able to kind of enact on it and work on it. You know, if you can put that transition program earlier in the spring, give them that chance to start running with it while, as Jessica was saying, you know, their predecessor is there to help them through it, it will help a lot. You know, if you hand off everything and say, great, I'll see you in August or September in a couple of months, and they don't get the chance to really implement that training work, you know, there will be some bit of, you know, loss of that transition program. And we look at what's the core of why we're transitioning, you know, we're making sure that handoff is done well. We're making sure that our successors learn from what we knew. And, you know, you put it at a bit of a disadvantage if it's so late in the semester, the academic year, that they don't get the chance to really implement it. And then some of it's just lost through lack of, you know, act on it. I think anytime we can practice, you know, our skill sets, it's going to make us a ton better. And shout out to Hunter from Omicron, I believe.
Omicron, that's it.
Yeah.
He made a convention blog. I remember. How do you, this is just a random question that I have, so how do you feel about having binders for your specific position, having just certain materials that get passed down? Jonah likes to be green, yes.
I think realistically it could be a green thing, but realistically it's you know, 2016. And I think now, I think you and I, and I'm sure Jessica going from chapter visits, us, having served with councils and talking with chapters and talking with some struggles, it's almost a universal that, oh, we had this paper thing and then it got lost or it got damaged or this physical thing. So whenever that's a possibility that this binder is the only place where information is stored, you are going to run the risk of that just being a loss of transition and information. You can, stuff in Google Docs that can be shared with an entire eBoard, or, why not just share it with the entire chapter? Everyone should be able to have access and read what a transition program is. It's not something that is unique to just the president or has secrets in there. It should be a chapter resource that people value and people are constantly looking at, because there's certain core elements of transitioning that a committee chair can learn from, an officer can learn from, an alumni advisor could learn from, a chapter advisor could learn from. So I'm a massive advocate, and honestly, I just think with the times, like, if it's not digital and if it's not shared with multiple people, like, no, don't put it on a flash drive, don't put it in a binder, don't print this out. Realistically, if I get paperwork from my office and they said, here's a bunch of stuff, it's going to go sit on my desk and get buried under stuff, and then several months later I'm not going to have read it and I'm going to toss it out, and like, if that's what they thought about the value of it, instead of actually having a program where it was taught and handed off to me in better ways that had longevity to it, then I kind of look at it as though it wasn't important enough.
Yeah, I definitely agree. My favorite answer when I asked one of the officers I worked with, where's the binder that you were given, it was in China. It had got moved when someone went overseas, and I was like, it doesn't do you any good there. But I think having it electronically, whether it's a Google Doc or another system, also helps you keep it up to date. Again, plugging the Resource Center, it's always being kept. One of the things I love about Phi Sigma Pi is that we're always evaluating and changing things so that our members can have the best experience. And so if you link something to the Resource Center, every time you go there, you'll know that you're getting the most up-to-date information, you're getting the most up-to-date changes if there's any policy changes. Same thing if you link something to your university or your campus. You know that you're going to get the right information. And with something printed out, it's a lot harder to keep it up to date.
Yeah, definitely. And with Lincoln, I'll just tie in there, like, don't recreate or reproduce work. If it's out there somewhere on the fraternity site or the university site, just send the person there and let them maintain and update it. No reason to duplicate effort.
Absolutely. And also, just going back to plugging resources too, we haven't mentioned yet, a big chapter resource would be your chapter consultants. 100%. If you are ever having trouble with anything, officer transition related or other, please feel free to reach out to your consultant. Their emails are on the national website, and they're your first resource for really anything chapter related. So make sure you're working with your consultants for sure.
And I imagine you guys can, having the experience, jump in and tell me, but if I'm building a program at my chapter, I'm guessing if I invited my consultant to review it with the chapter before it's put in place, that they would definitely jump at that opportunity and definitely give me feedback that they know from other chapters, best practices about how to improve mine. So I think if you give them the chance to help you make it better, that they probably would.
Yeah, and I think the chapter consultants can also help if you're wanting to throw in a leadership in action module into the transition program. There are several specifically for first-time officers and challenges that they may face, for new Eboards to do together and new officer groups. So if you tell them maybe the things that you want to cover, they can definitely recommend the best module for you to host.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to give a couple minutes and see if we get any more questions on Twitter.
Yeah, we already have a couple.
Oh, we do? Yay.
So one is, how do you set up a transition program?
Yeah, big question. I think there's several ways to go about it. I think one is, don't reinvent the wheel. If you haven't done this yet, like I said, maybe start with a consultant and see if there's a framework that you can borrow, whether, it may be in a resource online that you don't know about. I'd maybe just start asking there and say, what structure exists that I can build off of. If it's not with them, maybe you go to a campus resource and say, can I just review, can you come talk to us about what your transition program looks like at a broad level? You don't have to give away stuff that, they don't necessarily want to share about their program, but just like, what does it mean? Should there be mentoring programs? Should there be, one-on-one stuff? Should it be group consensus about how we're building this program? So I would borrow as much as you can if you don't have one in place yet. Because likely those people, one, or at least one step ahead of you, but more likely not, have reviewed it and found what works and revised it and improved it over time. So you're starting off on a really good setting if you can borrow something that works really well.
Yeah, and I think going back to the guide, it really, lays it out step by step, so definitely use that as a resource. Our next Twitter question is from Gamma Theta. They ask, we've had a problem with officers resigning from a position after one semester. How can we thwart this?
I think a big piece of this, first of all, shout out to Gamma Theta, that is my husband's chapter. Hello. So I think a big reason, a big question to ask is, why are they resigning? Figure out the root of the problem first. Is it a time commitment issue? Is it something else? I would try to figure that out. Is it something to do, like, is every single historian, for example, have they resigned after one semester? Is it something to do with the actual position that we could tweak? I think getting to the actual root of the problem is probably the most helpful. Yeah.
I think to build off that, if you get to the root of the problem and you start seeing that it is something consistent, I think, how do we then build off that? I think maybe there's two things. At the beginning of the chat, Natalie talked about being available to talk to the people that are running about asking those hard questions. Maybe the reality of what the position requires isn't fully explained or documented. Document away on what does a transition look like, but then what are responsibilities of those people in that transition look like. So not only is it going to help that incoming person, but it's going to help everyone else around them to know how to give them feedback and judge their success. If you're being judged or you're judging others on something that's in your head that's going to differ than theirs, I think you can get into some of this stuff where dynamics with an e-board where somebody may walk away because they felt that there was different understandings of what that role is. Get it down and have everyone agree on what the requirements for that role is. And two, I'd add to that is also something maybe we can jump into or not, but with transition programs, and that, like, I love SMART goals. You're going to pull these from your career at a later time. Make sure that people are being judged and reviewed on something you've agreed to in terms of where progress needs to be at a certain point in time. And it's great for that to be as transparent as possible for all parties. So if you do get to Natalie's point in figuring out what is the underlying problem, hopefully those are two things that can go towards addressing it, and that can be built in pretty easy into a program.
Just something specific, sorry Jessica, something specific that we did that was really helpful in my collegiate chapter was to all sit down and make a list of things I wish I would have known as an officer, just either related to serving on e-board, related to your specific officer position. I think that was a really good activity for us to do so that we can make sure for the next person coming in that they do know those things, and to Jonah's point, lay out those expectations.
Yeah, and I think I would just really encourage shadowing too. If you're thinking about initiative advisor, it's something that you're potentially going to run for. Maybe ask if you can take a more involved role, the semester before, and really get an idea of what that position would look like, the time requirement, maybe the stressors that are involved with that position, so you can really get an idea of it's something that you want to do. Because some positions look really great from the outside, and then maybe your strengths are not aligned with that when you actually start seeing the role. The other suggestion I would have is to just check in. If you know that the previous officer is around and available, maybe setting up a call with them, a few weeks into the new semester, and checking in and just asking, any questions that have come up. And for, presidents and vice presidents, check in with the officers and the chairs and say, how are you doing in your transition? How can I support you? Is there anything I can do to help make this smoother for you? I think that those things might help kind of avoid some of those problems that might make someone resign.
Yeah. Can we go back really quick to Jonah's point, and can you explain to us what a SMART goal is?
Yeah, you're going to put me on the spot here, right? I have to know what the acronym is. Somebody, do either of you know it off the top of your head?
Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time sensitive. I think time sensitive. Yeah.
And so this is going to be, if it's not something you're already doing in your collegiate life or within it, I promise you it's going to be something in your career that, you know, you're going to set up annual performance goals, which is what you will be measured against if you're successful. Any career is going to have this, and you're going to do it in some sense of it. And so what that basically means is, you know, if you're transitioning into eBoard for the first time and your goal is, I want to make the chapter better, it's like, how do you know when you've gotten to that point? So what the SMART goal tries to do is set real, honest benchmarks so that you can't just kind of drift by and be like, oh yeah, I've met that, but it forces you to really assess the situation honestly. So when you're looking at measurable goals, it's like, how am I going to make the chapter better? You know, I'm going to increase events, or I'm going to increase, you know, chapter morale. How are you going to increase chapter morale? Well, I'm going to measure it beforehand, I'm going to measure it afterwards, and then I'm going to tell, was I successful? Timeliness, you know, it's not just my goals are, I have 5 goals for the upcoming year, and realize that, you know, come April, oh, I haven't done any of them, so let's rush and get them all done. No, like the time-sensitive nature of it is, I'm going to give myself enough time to successfully do them throughout the year. So first goal is going to be, I know I can do it in 3 months, so I'm going to set a deadline for myself so that I know that, you know, I'm not just sliding by. Next goal, you know, I know it's going to take a bit longer, and you're going to break that down into, you know, check-in times with, you know, who are you reporting to? Are you reporting to an eBoard? Are you reporting to a chapter? And if you can accept that and adopt that kind of as a philosophy, it's just going to help you become a much better leader, because it puts responsibility on you to really own up to what do you want to do, what have you succeeded at doing, and it's going to help you a ton in your career. I promise you, writing annual performance goals is not the most fun thing that anyone has to do, but if you get used to it early on, it becomes easier and will make, you know, your job, your career post-graduation a little bit easier.
I work as a speech therapist for my real job, and there is no way I can get by with writing care plans for kids and getting insurance companies to pay for my services unless the goals are measurable and, you know, timely. So that's a very excellent point, and that's something that, to be honest, you know, I actually did learn how to do from Phi Sigma Pi. So that is great. The Twitter questions are kind of flooding in a little bit, so if you guys don't mind, we might take another one. We have one from Steven from Epsilon Alpha. Shout out to Steven. And he's just asked, do we recommend creating a Google Doc or Dropbox file to help make transition smoother? We kind of talked about this a little bit already. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like Jonah was saying, it's much easier than, I don't know if you tuned in earlier, Stephen, but Jessica mentioned a paper binder getting lost in China in the midst of officer transition. So yes, just having something electronic that everybody has access to that can't really get lost, if you will, is definitely very helpful. Do you have the one from Sarah, Jessica, the Twitter question?
No, the last one I got was Gamma Theta.
Okay. I had one from Sarah. I'm not sure what chapter you are from, but it says, do you recommend creating a transition document for how the program should be laid out? They may be in addition to the one that we have.
Yeah, I think it's always good to take anything that you get from the national website and anything that the national staff provides you and make sure it works for your chapter. So there might be, I know I worked with chapters that their school required them to fill out mountains of paperwork every year to make sure that they maintain status. That's not going to be in the chapter transition guide on the national website. So that might be something that you include in your local chapter's documents to make sure that that's something that's transitioned. A lot of campuses also require that maybe the presidents or vice presidents attend some type of training or retreat to prepare them for anything that the campus requires. So that might be something that you include. And then, your chapter is going to know best what needs to be transitioned. So if your chapter does a huge Relay for Life event, that's going to be something that you want to touch on every single transition. If you have, your e-board structured in a certain way, that's something that you're going to want to touch on. So I think including those things that are really important to your chapter that happen annually that maybe not every brother would know, that would be really important.
Great. I have a question for you guys. So Joni, you founded a chapter, and then Jessica, you helped to start up chapters. So what advice do you guys have for maybe some of our younger chapters that are still kind of finding their identity within Phi Sigma Pi? It's just a much different experience than what I had coming in as a collegiate member of a chapter that had been around for 8-9 years. So we had our flow a little bit.
Yeah, tons. Go back and forth. Borrow ideas. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. At any given time throughout the year, we're going to have multiple chapters in the same situation. And I think one of the hard things for me was looking at it as, a first-time president of a chapter that didn't exist, a year before, and feeling that, we weren't up to par with some of these other chapters that were doing such successful things, and not understanding the perspective of it, that, yeah, they're doing amazing things, and they've done this for 15 years, and here we are like 2 months in trying to figure this out, or a year into it. So I think use those chapters to, hear what works well, talk to them about what the best things are, and adapt, borrow, reuse that as much as possible. Keeping in mind, the fraternity doesn't expect you to be perfect day one. The entire process of, joining the organization, our initiation program, our transition into being an officer, our transition from an undergrad to an alumni, is all about this idea of growth and the fact that we're never going to be 100% where we want to be all the time. We're always going to have chances to improve upon ourselves or improve upon our chapter, and that's expected of you as a new chapter. Looking back, hindsight 2020, like, I would love to have told myself that, and I just didn't buy into it. But I promise you, like, being somebody that's been there, we want you to, learn how to do stuff on your own, or have certain stumbles so you can figure out what works best for you. You can't just hand you a program and say, this is a perfect chapter, this is how you're going to do it. So borrow great ideas, but also realize that, you are always going to be improving upon yourselves from where you are.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think our newer chapters have the really unique opportunity to take the best of what all the chapters around them have learned and make it their own. And so I think that once they become confident in their ability to do that, that's when they really shine and kind of hit their peak as a new chapter. And that's so exciting that we get to watch them do that. I think the other thing would just be to ask a lot of questions and to constantly evaluate. So I know something I'm constantly telling the chapters I'm working with is, how did that work and what would you change? So every single time that you do something, like, how did that work, how do we feel about it, and what would we change? And then let's go ahead and put that into practice so that the next time we do this, whether it's our class doing this or the next class or the next group of people, that it's always getting better. And I think that's how some of our really strong chapters develop. Whether you're a new chapter or an old, I encourage you to evaluate. But I think that for some of our newer ones, it's especially important.
Before we get too far on it, that was going to be like, if we had closing remarks, part of my piece, like, I'm going to take that and now adapt it to the transition program we were talking about. It's like, what do we do well and how do we improve upon it? Make sure that we're reviewing our own transition programs. Having a transition program 1 year does not mean it's perfect. Spend quality time asking these questions, and it kind of ties back to a couple questions, like asking the hard questions, asking people what do they wish they knew then. Make sure that in the transition program that, after it's completed, talk to the people who came in through the program and people that just left through the program and say, what worked well, what didn't work well, and what can we do better next year? And know that part of that transition program is reviewing that program after it finishes, because you will never have a complete and perfect program. It's always going to be changing and moving forward. So, I think just make sure that a lot of the stuff we're telling you, like, wrap it all into this big, big program, and it's a lifetime commitment.
I think one of my big pieces, I'm also a former chapter consultant from back in the day, and I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I would give really any chapters with regards to either just officer transition or chapter operations is just because something doesn't work out necessarily, it doesn't mean that it should necessarily be written off. Right, so I like the what would you change about it? So figuring out why didn't it work out. Maybe the climate has changed to where it could work out in the following semester. So I think that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give is just with officer transitions is to figure out why things didn't work out and don't just write something off just because it didn't go well the first time. So.
Before you get to that, Natalie, I'll throw in a little slogan that Natalie and I like to use a lot is the how do you know that kind of thing, and we're using that throughout life. So the what didn't work well, before you throw something away, ask how do I know it's not working, and then when you get that answer, challenge that again. Well, how do I really know that people didn't buy into the program? And you kind of get that. You can really dig to some really deep underlying issues. We use it a lot on council. I imagine we're both probably using it still today in this thing. So it's a good way to kind of get to that root question of, what was going wrong to help you answer that.
Great. Did you have something else, Jessica? Before I cut you off? Okay. All right. Do we have any more email questions? Getting towards the end of Twitter.
I haven't seen any more come in. Maybe we do like a. Anybody have any?
Do any more email questions for us? So while we're waiting a couple minutes for that, just to tell you guys future hangouts. So we're doing these, once every month, couple of months. So we have one coming up with our VP of Finance, Sarah Cantwell, all about fundraising. We also. Registration is open for our alumni convention, which is going to be in June in Seattle. So that's very exciting that we are going out to the West Coast.
Graduating seniors can join us there. So come hang out. Show me around.
Jen is very excited about alumni. And then, of course, our Centennial National Convention registration is open for that. You can register at phisigmapi.org/national convention or phisigmapi.org/alumni convention for Seattle. So we are so excited. All three of us will be there. We're looking forward to seeing everybody there. It's going to be a really wonderful, wonderful celebration. I can't wait. So, do you guys have any kind of wrap-up remarks or last-minute bits of thought before we wrap this up?
I think my last thought would just be, you have a ton of resources out there, so make sure you use them. From the Resource Center to your consultant to campus resources, use all of them to your full advantage so that you can build that transition program that's going to work best. And then to Jonah's final point, make sure you constantly evaluate it so that it can always get better.
Yeah, and I'd say, realize that the best leader, the best officer realizes that they're part of a team, and transitioning is a team and chapter thing. It's not you send somebody off to transition and they either did or they didn't. The success of the chapter is everybody collectively doing it. Everyone has a role. So make sure you include the chapter as a whole. It's a program for them, although it looks on the outside like it's one officer handing something to another officer. It's how does the chapter move from this year to next year to 2 years ahead of time, and always be measuring success and validating that and finding out, how do I know that this is working well? How do I know this isn't? And improve upon it.
Absolutely. Just a quick plug too, as we transition, we are also electing a new national council this summer, and nominations are going to be due on March 29th. So if you're at all interested in running and would like to talk to any of us, you can feel free to email myself or Jonah or all of council. Please use us as your resources as well. If you're still struggling with officer transition, use your consultants, use all of the resources that we mentioned on our website. But thank you guys so much for taking time out of your evening to join us, and thanks for everybody that's been watching, and we've really appreciated having this discussion with everybody. If you have more questions, feel free to tweet them at #PSP Roundtable, and we will be sure to answer them for you. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks. Yeah, have a good night.